Welcome to a new episode of IMPAKT TV, and today dedicated to the web project or online exhibition Weird Gnosis. Tonight we have a special guest, Erik Davis, and my name is Michelle from IMPAKT Center for Media Culture in Utrecht, and I'm here with Mark Toetes, Assistant Professor Media Studies at the University of Amsterdam, and he's also the co-curator of Weird Gnosis, together with Ines de Co. And together we will be your hosts for tonight. And tonight is actually a very special episode. It is the last one, the concluding one of this year, of the first year of IMPAKT TV. IMPAKT TV is a new series of monthly events that we launched at IMPAKT. And so every first Thursday of the month, here at Planet IMPAKT, we talk with a special guest about a topical issue or subject. And in past episodes, we talked about NFTs or conspiracy theories. What is the influence of algorithms on your music taste, for instance? And also in the new year, we plan to go on with the tradition of the monthly IMPAKT TV episodes. So for more information or to rewatch past episodes, make sure to check out our website, impact.nl. And but now let's get back to tonight, as we want to take you on a journey into some weirder parts of the web. And we invited American writer and scholar Erik Davis to talk with us about occult, arcana, rituals, psychedelic, conspiracy theories, and how are these mediated online. And in a few minutes, we will start with this presentation, which brings me to one more person that I would like to introduce tonight, which is André Capot, our secret online moderator. You do not see him, but behind the scenes, he's very busy gathering all the questions that you can type in the chat, in the live chat under the live stream, or that you send to us via email at questions@impact.nl. So at any moment during the broadcast, you can type them, send them, and we will make sure that we ask them to Erik. And but now, before giving the floor to Erik for his presentation, let's have a look at a short teaser of the web project, and then Mark Toetes will actually tell us a little bit more about this weird online exhibition.
Thanks, Michelle. So I'm going to just say a few words now about this exhibition. It's online. It's got a fantastic, really original interface design as well, that by Alex Piacentini, which I think is really worth checking out. So yeah, 2021 turning out to be super weird. The pandemic, climate change, meltdown continuing, conspiracy theories all over the place. When we were thinking about this exhibition before the pandemic, no, actually, I think it was in fact during the pandemic, we were both Inez and I were very much inspired by Erik's book, the Gnostic skepticism of Erik's book, and it really informed the way that we approached this. So basically what we did was we sought to kind of curate practices that help us to imagine media differently against the context of the psychedelic renaissance that's going on, collecting a bunch of art practices that represent a kind of an archaic revival of sort of non-modern, but in another way, hyper-modern engagements with technology. So what I would like to do, rather than go on in detail about this, is to give a short introduction to Erik, and then subsequently we can come back to look at a few of the pieces to get a bit more of a sense of the exhibition. So many of you may well know Erik Davis, and maybe you're subscribers to his Burning Shore mailing list. For the rest of you, I'm just going to really quickly summarize his output. He put out a really important book years ago, Gnosis, a classic in the field of new media studies. At least one full professor that I know essentially launched his research from that book. He's the author of several other books, including Visionary State, about a kind of coffee table book about California. He's done a lot of work on California, Californian consciousness culture, as he calls it. Nomad Codes, a collection of essays. He was the associate editor of the Exegesis of Philip K. Dick, bringing in all kinds of interesting people like the media theorist Catherine Hales, amongst others. I think that in the blurb for Erik's newest book, High Weirdness, it's nice. His contribution is nicely summed up by another media scholar, Mackenzie Wark, who says that there's no better guide to the outer limits than Erik Davis. So Erik pursued a PhD after having done a great deal of other things in his career at Rice with Jeffrey Kripal, a really important religious studies, esotericism studies scholar, and that culminated in High Weirdness, which is a book about three, as he calls them, Gnostic skeptics, McKenna, Robert Anton Wilson, and Philip K. Dick, who had direct acquaintances with the weird and perturbations in the reality field, in Philip K. Dick's terms. Erik is the only person, I believe, whom I've ever met in both the context of the European new media art scene, which is where I would say we are here, and also on the playa at Burning Man. Okay, so I want to now, in a moment, hand this over. I just want to quickly give one quote that Erik included in his book here from Felix Guattari that I thought was really interesting for framing a couple of the artworks here. Felix Guattari, in this quote, says, "Technological machines of information and communication operate at the heart of human subjectivity." I find that a really interesting idea. It suggests that our conscious and our unconscious are connected into the realm of technology, and therefore they can be shaped, but they also have a history. And that's something that I think you can see being engaged with in a number of the artworks here. Susan Treister's work, Zach Blass's work, Juliette Lizotte's work, Camille Barton's work, Agnes Momirsky's work. They're all kind of engaged in this idea that Erik talks about, citing Lilly, of metaprogramming. And that's the idea of applying, in essence, the idea of set and setting from psychedelia, psychedelic studies, but here to new media, to reprogram your mind with new media technologies. So with that sort of setup, I believe Erik is going to tell us something along the lines of this kind of sense of the mind as an effect of media technologies, which is a really interesting part of his book that kind of bookends the profiles on these three psychonauts that he's put together. So I would like to now hand the mic to Erik Davis.
Hey everyone, wonderful to be here. Good to see you again, Mark, Michelle. I really appreciate this invitation, and really appreciate the work you're doing and the artwork in particular. One of the things when I was talking to Mark earlier about doing a talk here is he invited me to sort of underscore the media studies aspect of my book High Weirdness, which I really appreciated because I don't really feel like I have sort of a core intellectual current. I've been able to sort of leapfrog between different frameworks and develop a sort of palimpsest of theories and ideas and perspectives that sort of cohere, or at least cohere enough to do interesting projects. But one of the most central ones is media studies, technologies of communication, and I was lucky in the 1990s. As I was doing the research that went into technosis, I became kind of part of that scene, and then through the next decade or so. So it was a very interesting time to be doing media studies, and in a way, I brought this stuff into my PhD project, which on the surface is not quite as obviously related to that, although it's deep down, it's very much a media studies book, because I'm really dealing with extraordinary experiences of consciousness. And so I'm looking at, the experiences themselves to the degree that you can do that, but certainly the texts that come out of these experiences, in particular with these three very interesting characters, Terence McKenna, Robert Anton Wilson, and Philip K. Dick. And I just want to say just a little bit about them, about why I chose them. Mark calls them Gnostic skeptics, and I think that's a really key element, is that in different ways they were all asking hard questions, or maintained a kind of critical thinking, even as they were plunging into possibility spaces, esoteric frameworks, encounters, revelations that really go beyond the pale of what we normally think of as the sort of safe realm of skepticism or even rationality. And to my mind, this is a somewhat admirable stance, because I've always been attracted to, let's call it, the weird throughout my career as a journalist and an essayist and a scholar. And yet I've always felt it was really important to maintain this kind of critical edge. And for a long time, that was mostly just sort of a stance that I took. Like I'm the guy who can go in a participant observer way to, Burning Man, or an ayahuasca circle, or an occult ritual, and kind of go through it, enjoy it, have the experiences that I have, and sort of come back with, like, maybe not both feet on the ground, but at least one foot on the ground. And it was sort of like a stance. And now I feel like it's like the only way I can stay sane in our current sort of meltdown, because we're all sort of thrust into the fire now. And do we, rigorously hold on to, the dwindling frameworks of rationality and critical thought, and even, historical materialism as a framework for understanding the superstructure out of which all of this kind of ideological froth is getting crazier and crazier and absorbing people into these parallel epistemologies, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, it's good. It's good. But in a way, we're all in it now. We're all dreaming other people's dreams and trying to navigate through that. So there's a certain lightness of foot that demands a kind of criticality that I'm really that I'm particularly interested in. Just this morning, actually, I was reading a Substack I like called Psychopolitica, and he had linked to a Terence McKenna rant from the 1990s, and it was really shocking how resonant it was, because he was talking about the balkanization of epistemologies and the sort of way that people, neighbors, can be living in completely different universes. One person thinks quantum physics is the ultimate key to reality. The other person is channeling archangels, and they're living in the same, apartment building. And he talks about the way this is happening on a kind of cultural, intellectual level, and then of course that it's also driven by technologies. And he was probably saying this in, I don't know, 1995, when these things were already visible. I was already kind of tuning into that, partly through my friendship with Terence and sort of tapping into certain kinds of strains of psychedelia mixed with McLuhan. And he's a very interesting figure in terms of this question about media studies and esotericism and psychedelics, because the funny thing about Terence McKenna, if you know him, he's sort of known as this mushroom raconteur, talking about the transcendent object at the end of history that's warping and bringing on this kind of apocalyptic condition that's all sort of mediated through the revelation of psychedelics, mushrooms, DMT. But if you go through his history, like what really formed him is his earlier writings are mostly about McLuhan. And he was a very interesting kind of countercultural thinker, in that on the one hand, he was very much a part of the youth movement, anti-war, anti-patriarchy, anti-capitalist, looking for, dreaming new ways of being, sort of touched by the hippie vision, but also politicized. But in another way, he was kind of unusual for that time, in that he was very much a technophile and a McLuhanite. So he sort of saw technology as producing the context for new consciousness, new changes in culture, et cetera, in a way that's very difficult for us these days to really hold on to. And in a sense, that was the dream that then got commercialized and amplified by Silicon Valley and the California ideology, and landed us in the contemporary dystopia that we are in now. Side note, I don't know if any of you saw the meme that was going around, but someone dug up a Wired magazine from, I think, 1997, and it was, the cover was like, I don't remember what it said exactly, but it was essentially like, why the explosion in technology is going to deliver an endless world of economic abundance. I mean, it was a total techno-utopian, celebration, that particular issue. And there was one article that was like, well, it might not go so well. Here's some things that might happen that would derail this techno-utopia. And there's like, a number, 10 points or something, and like 8 of them came true. And so it's really, I don't know, it's a weird synchronicity. It had a little bit of uncanniness to it. Some of that oracular divinatory quality that's very much in evidence in the artworks in Weird Gnosis, which I think is a really important key. In fact, we can even just follow this in the somewhat associational way that I've constructed this talk so far. The associational is a really key element here. If you go back and you look at the history of what Foucault called epistemes, what happens just before modernity, what happens just before we start to get rationalized forms of classification and the organization of knowledge, where you have this kind of, early modern, late medieval modality within which esotericism, magic, and the occult play a very important role. Not simply that they were renovated and revived in an important way, but that they actually, again, articulated something about the epistemic framework that placed a huge amount of emphasis on correspondences, associations. How do you organize knowledge, right? How do you link things together in some way that gives you a map that you can use? And within magic, within the occult, there is this tremendous emphasis on a certain kind of associational thinking. And that, there's correspondences between planets and certain metals and certain plants. And that if you wanted to do a spell to invoke Venus, you needed to have some copper, and then maybe you draw a planetary sigil of the planet Venus, and you would time your ritual so it's a time when the planet Venus is exalted in the sky. So all of these different things become organized in an associational network. This is almost precisely the kind of episteme that gets split and cut with the turn towards modernity and science. One of the paradoxes of technologies, of media technologies, is that even if they hold and spread a kind of rational logic, that if you intensify them enough, they start to go surreal. They start to go weird. And that's where we're in now. We're in this internet, social media, information explosion, mind invasion phase of history, where it becomes exceptionally difficult to think even about the most concrete elements of life, of material politics, of material technologies, energy, power, the body, health. Like, I'm not talking about esotericism. I'm not talking about the mysteries of the cosmos. I'm just talking about concrete things in our lives, and they are sort of melting into these surreal possibilities layered with conspiracies and reframeworks and disruptive utopian potentials, and everything is weaponized in some sort of game of signs and algorithmic controls. And so it's like we're the associational returns, and that's part of what the weird is it's like you're back in a magical universe, but you don't really believe or know how to manipulate it as a magician, as a sorcerer necessarily. And that's where this weird kind of Gnostic skepticism comes in, where you recognize that skepticism, reason, logic, analysis, they're part of the picture, and yet they no longer have the claims, or they no longer clear the ground the way you would like them to. So when I think about my project now, leaving aside the specific gentlemen, which we can talk about, they're all very interesting. Robert Anton Wilson in particular is important for us today because in many ways his farcical fictions anticipated a lot of the contemporary conspiracy theory scene. And he's a very good figure to understand how conspiracy theory historically became kind of conspiracy culture in both the sort of celebratory and ultimately a kind of toxic way. So he's a very interesting figure. But the larger story I want to say now that I think will lead into our discussion is what I was writing about was the 70s, and that these guys were exemplars of a certain kind of mutation in consciousness, both ecstatic, non-ordinary consciousness and cultural consciousness that symptomized the 1970s. And so what is it about the 70s? Well, the way that I increasingly look at it is that the sort of McLuhan-esque moment of the 60s leading into the 70s is the kind of apotheosis of analog media. And that what happens subsequently is this sort of emergence of a digital logic until we get to the place now when we're, consumed by it. When, even an artifact of major analog nostalgia like Peter Jackson's new 8-hour Beatles documentary, Get Back, which on the one hand is just a complete immersion in that old analog media saturation, exceptionally McLuhan-esque kind of document. And yet the way that they produced the film is with machine learning, going back and scraping away all the noise from these analog recordings in order to uncover the signals that can now be enjoyed almost in a kind of surveillance way, motivated by our nostalgia and continued interest in this very analog rock and roll band. So in a way, the 70s are this kind of last gasp of the analog within which patterns of the coming digital become prophesied. And all of these thinkers do this. They're all interested in cybernetics and systems theory and computers and science fiction in ways that sort of look forward to I think, our contemporary mutation. And I find that one of the features about this material, and I think you see it a lot in esotericism and the occult, is that it allows you to tie into these earlier currents that give you a kind of ballast amidst the madness. And so they simultaneously function as kind of surrealism or irrationality even, and yet they provide a kind of sense of continuity, a kind of patterning. And one of the things that I noticed looking through, I didn't look at all of the pieces in the exhibit yet, but the ones that I see, is that it's one thing to kind of like goof with the esoteric as sort of a, it's just another set of symbols to play with, or maybe there was a certain edginess to it, although I think that's increasingly less the case as it becomes part of the mainstream. Like everything else, all the margins are in the middle, there is no middle. But I also sensed a kind of a deeper, both a longing and a need to create cosmological frameworks, that all of this media stuff is still happening within, or arguably is still happening within the cosmological framework of a planet hurtling in space, surrounded by other planetary bodies radiated with cosmic rays. And that desire to sort of get out of the circulation of mere media signals and to find a larger framework, it may not be possible, but I think it's also part of what's happening with consciousness today. And it's part of what's driving some of this kind of esoteric turn, is not just a sense of the weird as the place where marginal or countercultures continue to exist, or a sort of subversion or transgression of dominant cultural codes. Again, these are kind of somewhat outmoded motivations in some ways. But I think it's also, there's a kind of neo-animism, a sense that we are still embedded in larger frameworks than even these, and that the way we connect with them may be precisely through these kind of marginal, imaginal, dreamlike modes of consciousness and of culture. I think one sort of final note that to me represents a lot of this in a somewhat disturbing way, but also kind of interesting in terms of the conjunction of media and the magical imagination, is the growing interest of advertisers in the cultivation of dreams. And there was a phrase back in the 90s, I can't remember who first came up with it, the corporate colonization of the unconscious. And in some sense, that's been happening all along. That's what advertising is. That's what marketing is tying into the into dream and desire with images and slogans that can organize our behavior. But now it's actually like a technical object, that the ability to cultivate and incubate dreams, that is, to dream in certain directions, is something that we have the capacity to do. And in fact, you can put signals in a room as somebody's going to sleep and find that there are distinct changes in how they behave afterwards, in a way that even if you give those same signals when they're awake, doesn't happen. There's some way in which signals in a dream state can lead to more direct behavioral changes. And so the advertising industry has cottoned on to this. And, one way of thinking about this, and this kind of brings it around again in this admittedly somewhat associational talk to the point I made initially about Gnostic skepticism, is that we can't get out of the dreaming either. Just as we can't get out of our social position, we can't get out of the material realities of history, we also can't get out of dreaming, or the collective dream, or the collective meltdown, which is what, whatever is happening with the internet. We're not getting out of that. And that the skills we need to sort of stay awake or stay on our toes aren't simply critical ones. They also have to do with a kind of dream work. And that's one of the things that one of the roles that art is playing now that I think it maybe was not, maybe it doesn't really apply as much in earlier eras, is, and it's very true of the pieces in Weird Gnosis, which is, it's almost like, here's how this realm works. No, no, no. It really works this way. We're not just goofing around. It really is associational and creepy, and paranormal things happen, and paranoia is part of the picture, and gods may be whispering in our ears and we don't know what that means. But that's not, you know, it's not just happening over here in a little weird world that we can just tap into while we live the rest of our lives over here. It's part of the zone we're in. And to both embrace that, but then continue the critical operation, continue an analysis, continue to contextualize, to make new linkages, to explore technologies and ways of relating, but to not pretend that that stuff isn't now kind of part of our zone, just the same way that we have to deal with conspiracy theories, whether we want to or not, whether we believe them or not, whether we can see in them what Terence McKenna called epistemological cartoons, meaning that it's not that they're totally wrong, it's that they're like cartoons. You know, they have something to say, but to actually believe them or embrace them is a problem. But now our world is filled with these cartoons, just like they're filled with spirits or spells. And so I'm very happy to see Weird Gnosis and to be here, because it's heartening to see artists curating the weird in a way that directs us towards moving forward into it with open eyes, rather than just having a goof with the margins. So I think I'll end there, and we can have the chat with Mark. I'm looking forward to talking about some of these pieces.
Fantastic.
So much, yeah.
Okay, yeah, you can hear me. Yeah, I just put on the headphones.
Yeah.
Okay, cool, man. Well, I think maybe what makes sense for the audience is to just really quickly, with Michelle's help, run through a couple of the pieces, and you know, you can jump in at any point if you've got any thoughts, Erik. I think you might have seen some of these pieces, so I'm just gonna summarize them a little bit. So what we're looking at right now on screen here is Ellie Wyatt's piece Cherry Picker, where she compiled a whole series of images that are presented as evidence of deeper patterns. So a kind of a vernacular of conspiracy theory. And then she put them together into a looping artwork where they're all centered in the center of the image. It's very haunting. The other image that maybe, Michelle, could you put on the parallel ecologies screenshot by Jeff?
This
one? Yeah.
No, this one, no? Yeah.
That's Joshua's piece. We can talk about that one. I was thinking of Jeff's piece, Parallel Ecologies.
Let me see that. That's
There
completely,
you go.
yes, here it is.
Cool. So yeah, that's an interactive piece that sort of takes you down the proverbial rabbit hole. And when you go down into this rabbit hole, you're confronted with all of these like cryptozoological spirit guides. And this piece actually reminded me of this another amazing quote by Guattari that I came across for the first time in your book, Erik. I'd like to read it because it's just so awesome. In corporeal domains of entities we detect at the same time that we produce them, and which appear to have always been there from the moment we engender them. And I think that some of these works really speak to these kinds of really trippy ideas from post-structural theory like that. Another piece that we've seen flash by there is Jinju Chen's extrasolar evaluations 3 entropy. which is a story about a non-human intelligence called Ra, and reflections on the eschaton. So kind of reminiscent of some of the alien downloads that Erik, that your Gnostic skeptics experienced, that you cover in the book. The last piece that we saw a screenshot on the flash by for a moment there is Joshua Citarella's piece. Yeah, and this is a mapping of various positions, ideological positions on the political compass. And it's again an interactive piece, and so when you hover over those, when you click on one of those, it takes you to a YouTube video. So again, these rabbit holes, YouTube, which has been written about recently as one of the great machines for radicalization, brings you into these various radical political subcultures. And this is based on some work that Joshua did for a couple of years, researching what he called politogram. So this was like teenagers on Instagram who were basically trying out new kinds of mix and match ideologies, like fashion, and just going into more and more extreme niche subcategories. So some of these videos link to some pretty out there stuff, accelerationism on the left, on the right, all kinds of things. So that's a kind of a quick summary for the audience of a few of the pieces. I also at the outset mentioned a number of other pieces that deal with this idea that Erik writes about, of, at least I think that they deal with this idea of metaprogramming. So some things that Erik, in your book, you talk about in the context of the 70s, and are still talked about today, around psychedelics, but in this case, really more around technologies. And I don't know, like maybe just to put that point out there again, like I see a lot of really strong parallels between the period that you wrote about in your book and the period that we're in now. But one difference is that the technologies are just way, way more advanced, and that we're super immersed in them. And a lot of the way that we sort of talk about them, that we think about them when we think about them critically, is in terms of what they're kind of doing to us. But I think what's quite interesting about some of this artwork is also these efforts at thinking about how, we can basically, how artists imagine sort of self-transformation and meta-programming through these technologies. I think I've done enough of an introduction here. Maybe I could ask you, Erik, if you had any kind of responses to any of those artworks.
Sure. A lot of it, resonated with what I was talking about, quite clearly. I'm thinking right now of Ellie Wyatt's piece, because it does a couple of things that I think are go along these lines of associational thinking and esotericism, because you see these series of images, just rapid fire, like flickering, programming images, and you tell after a while that they're drawn from a wide range of sources, but you start to sense that there's some kind of pattern behind the surface images that you're seeing, and that's of course what it's pointing towards. There's a kind of pareidolia to our attempts to manage information excess, a sort of, it's as if when we get too much information, a different kind of pattern recognition kicks in. And some of it is very ancient, like ways of finding links or finding faces in clouds or finding patterns in a random distribution of stones along the bottom of a lake bed. Human beings have been attempting to find pattern in noise for a very long time. And I think one of the things that's happening, one of the attractions of conspiracy theory, which again McKenna calls these epistemological cartoons, is that they're simple enough, but they resonate enough to enable us to kind of feel like we're being able to organize or pattern this tremendous amount of noise. And whereas in earlier zones, I would have spoken mostly about this mostly in esoteric terms. That's why Ellie's video goes through, you go into UFOs and you go into cryptids and you go into ghosts, and there's this whole sort of arcana of the esoteric that is sort of dredged up when you begin to do this deeper pattern matching, particularly with marginal kinds of materials. But this whole logic now takes an increasingly political form as well, where like the logic of subcultural politics that Joshua is immersed in begins to take on some of that same kind of character, so that political positions, the intensities of them, the extremity of them, it's almost like they want to break out of a conventional history and kind of manifest some visionary take on things. And I think that's why there's such an emphasis on disruption, on radical alternatives. That part of the attraction of the radical is almost to just intensify things to get to this visionary sense of patterning that is invoked in the situation, almost whether we want it to be or not, simply because of the intensity and multiplicity of the media conditions. So I thought these were both really great interventions in that. And I really like the idea that the upside down pyramid, I thought was a really interesting way of approaching it, because I've seen, I'm often attracted to materials online where people try to map the subcultural terrain, and they come up with all these different ways of showing links and overlaps and different kinds of right-wing groups or left-wing groups, or both, or not even on conventional political perspectives, but just how subcultures interact. And there's this desire for map making, for pattern making, and yet there's something in the patterns themselves. An upside down pyramid is an upside down pyramid. It's like there's something in the patterns that we turn to try to make sense of it that also has something to say. And that's, I think, where part of that cosmological function comes in, because the cosmology is almost like the map of the whole that gives us an ability to sort of navigate. And in Yin-Ju Chen's work, I really sense that awareness of the power and the need for that cosmological framework, and the way it can provide a sort of outsider view that you can come back in and sort of relook at our particular conditions. And, personally, I find that kind of oscillation really, really necessary, that however much time we spend with the nitty gritty of the historical moment we're in, trying to understand what's going on, what power plays are happening, who's really behind, all of the in our face politics of the moment, that you need that cosmological escape, not to get out, although it's nice to have a break, just the way it's nice to have a dinner party with your friends and get drunk and, enjoy, playing live music or something like that. It's good to get a cosmological break, but the cosmological angle also provides a way of mapping and renovating your own ability to move through those spaces. And so there's something in it that's restorative, even if it doesn't necessarily make the picture much brighter. Like the end of her video is like, yeah, we're not getting out of the age of Iron Man. Or like once you have rivalrous dynamics on a global scale with limited resources and intense technologies, like we're in this thing, and I think part of it is also, I don't know, that is sort of raised by that is this: is it an eschaton? Maybe not the end of the world, whatever that means, but we're in a process where the feedback loops are so intense and the technologies are so powerful, that there is a kind of passivity, there is a kind of resignation that people are experiencing, and some of that manifests as a desire to get back to concrete experience, life with people, life with family, life with trees, life with plants, to retreat, to have some sense of a kind of material lock on something that is not available inside the media sphere. But it also just raises that question of, like, what do we do as critics? What do we do as politically engaged people? What do we do as intellectuals? It's like we're almost, we don't want to admit a kind of passivity or resignation, and yet that's sort of in the picture. And I think a lot of the people I know, a lot of the conversations I have, and I think that goes through a lot of the art I see as well, because in a way, one of the things about doing art where you're sort of curating elements of the web and remapping them or placing them in fabrics or intensifying them or parodying them, there's still kind of it's like you as the artist, or the artwork as the artwork is itself a symptom. It's itself a kind of like passive active relay of events, ideas, images that are coming from without, that are already there, that are already kind of happening. It's not an autonomous place of value production. It's a kind of remixer, a sort of filtering process. And I think it's a real conundrum how to move through this space.
Fantastic. I think that we at least scheduled to take a couple of questions. And I see a question in front of me, though I haven't had a chance to read it. So this is just right off the cuff. Niels, this may be a comment. I'm just reading it right off the screen. Niels says, in response to Erik Davis's comment on pattern recognition, you say that with too much information, a new form of pattern recognition kicks in. But isn't that a transhumanist position, a dualist position that separates body and mind? So kind of a philosophical teaser there.
I don't quite see. I mean, it's hard to do that because I don't quite see the connection between pattern, the development of pattern, or pattern recognition kicking in with a certain kind of information density, and the dualism of mind and body. I mean, I guess I don't really see it that way, nor do I see that as a particularly transhumanist perspective. I mean, I think that we are, and I don't really know exactly what that means. I mean, if it's some kind of advanced human, like post-human apotheosis or something, I that's not really what I meant. In fact, in some ways, I was talking about a situation that can be very, early human. When you have enough social complexity, you begin to develop other ways of patterning, and I think we can root this in the body in a natural environment, as well as a human being trying to make meaning at this point of media saturation. So I'm sure that's not a very satisfying answer to this question, but I don't quite see my,
Yeah, well, I mean, Niels got a shot at his question. I got a couple of other questions here for you, Erik. So in your book, you talk about how Robert Anton Wilson and Shea treated paranoia as a kind of an altered state of political consciousness that sort of forced confrontation with shadowy phantasms that cloak power. Today, when we're like constantly confronted with conspiracy theories, When you think about something like QAnon or Pizzagate, conspiracy theories that like, there's an argument that they started actually as a joke in both of those cases, but they certainly weren't a joke like earlier this year. So I guess, the question would be something like, this is something that I think we were trying to talk about when last time I saw you quite some years ago, because this stuff was already in the air. Like, can Robert Anton Wilson's sort of brand of libertarianism survive the sort of new media ecosystem where context collapse is just, ubiquitous?
Yeah, no, I don't think it does. And that was one of the interesting things about talking about this book when it came out, where I was just sort of, not that many people talked about Wilson very much. And then he sort of like suddenly became very relevant because in a way, even the humor and the pranking and the parody was sort of visible in the alt-right, and they had sort of selected this material, which for his position politically was complicated. He was a libertarian in some ways, very anti-power, very anti-war. It was much more of a hazy hippie libertarianism than what we mean by it today. He was not a market libertarian, but he definitely had ideas that don't survive the kind of transition that you're talking to. And in a way, you can look at it as kind of a sort of sorcerer's apprentice problem, where he let the cat out of the bag, and it just took 30 years for people to figure out what happens when you play parodic nihilistic games with conspiracy, esotericism, and the kind of veils of irony, the way that the right can sort of present heinous positions and then hide behind, oh, I'm just being funny. What are you getting so upset about? And there's a complicated dynamics that has to do with also about how certain left or progressive positions get installed in media culture, and so that creates a space for a counterculture that then is often, most of the time, more right wing in a lot of ways, like the real counterculture now. Where is it? It's the anti-vaxxers who feel like they're being thrust out of mainstream society because they're not buying this lie, and it's being so they get to be the kind of freedom fighters again. So does it survive? Not really. I think things have fundamentally changed in this regard, and that whereas in certain spaces of time there was room for a playful poking of paranoia as a kind of mechanism to itself sort of reveal these other dynamics. Now it's like the dynamics are quite visible, and then you're almost dealing with the problem of like, well, what about all these people who aren't getting it? What do you do? Oh no, there's no longer a position to educate. There's no longer a position to reframe. There's no longer a position to challenge, because of the nature of the media conditions have altered so much. So in a sense, that is a good example of how different things have become, particularly in terms of conspiracy theory, which itself is such a kind of a hairy topic in a lot of ways. Even the phrase itself has issues with it. But it's not there's definitely not a one-to-one correspondence between these realms anymore.
I think there's maybe time for one last question, and I'd like to actually direct it back to the beginning, like both of your talk, but also of like your career actually. So you used to work as like a subcultural journalist in the like cyberdelia, cyberpunk kind of scene. And so I just kind of like to ask if we could very briefly to just kind of recall that imaginary, like, and first of all, what was that? But more to the point, like, is that still a thing? And I'm thinking specifically here of the idea that it was like cyberspace, all that cyber stuff was a space apart. And like, we're now in a very, we're now in a world where we all live online all the time. Everything is constantly sucking information out of us. Does that kind of imaginary hold any value? Is it any currency? Is it a way to understand things? Is there something still to that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think about that a lot. And there's kind of two ways of thinking about it when you look back at the 1990s, and as new technologies created new spaces, and where different groups, different subcultures could project and discover new universes of value, possibilities, some utopian possibilities. And so that became a kind of live culture for a while. And cyberspace is a place of alterity, of invention, of new values, new forms of education. And it was a lot of fun too. It was to be back online in early 1990s. It's a very interesting time. It was most fun I've ever had on the internet. And now looking back, you can go, look, there's kind of two models. There were real possibilities there that didn't come to pass for various reasons, or it was always a delusion. And in some sense, this is the big question that any kind of jaded counterculturalist has after the fact. What was that just this brief period of time that contemporary history throws up these possibilities for dreaming at various points, and that people, if you're on the edge there, can sort of live it out or play it out or experiment with it, but it's just a passing moment because it gets reabsorbed into the machine? Or was it always hooey? Was it always just kind of goofing around as the real players made their plots and plans? And I feel I don't know the answer to that, and I've gone through my own interest in that zone, my own experiences of it, my own thoughts about it, and I feel like I haven't quite come to grips with that, and I don't think anybody else has either. In fact, it's sort of a weird lacuna in the social imagination, is what those years were really about. In a way, they're kind of embarrassing because they're sort of naive and goofy, but they're also untheorized, and they remain, in a way, still possible in some sense. I mean, there's still an air of something about them, but are they valid now? I mean, I do think that the conditions have changed so much that there's so many other really pressing issues that are knocking at our door that free expression through cyberdelic realities may not be top of the list. But the creative affirmation of technocultural mutation that has an element of consciousness change, or the techne of consciousness opens up and becomes part of this mutation, and that can be positive, or at least can be lively. That may still be a very valid thing to hold true to, because we're kind of in it. And that just the way that naivete can still be inspiring as one develops, as one moves forward into complex situations. I think there are moments there that are of value and are of worth, and we see some of it in the more interesting kind of collective aspects of psychedelics today. Although, again, even in that as an example, you got to dig for it, because the dominant space is so clearly reflective of a lot of negative developments in capitalism and wellness culture, in the use of apps to organize consciousness, and it becomes difficult, And so I still wrestle with it, in the sense that I don't feel like the story has really been told, and whether there will be a time again where that kind of, where populations who are interested in progressive liberatory values have that much control over the technologies and how they're being imagined and deployed. But I would certainly like to think that it's still there.
I think that's a really nice way to wrap things up. Thanks very much, Erik. Michelle, I give the last words to you.
Yeah, I picked up also naivete. We should be also a little bit more naive, maybe, play. So thank you so much, Erik, for this inspiring talk. Mark as well, of course. And we ended the last IMPAKT event of this year, actually. So thank you also very much for watching. And actually, we hope to see you very soon. On the 20th of January, we already have a new online event on digital witchcraft, actually. The Season of the Witch, an online event curated by Ines Deco. I mentioned her earlier already because she's also the co-curator of Weird Gnosis that we saw tonight. And for this event, the Season of the Witch, she will invite several artists and researchers to discuss the role and the potential of the figure of the witch in contemporary media. So 2 speakers are actually already confirmed, and we are very excited to announce them. Artist and digital witch Ginevra Petrozzi, and feminist writer, artist, and founder of the Digital Witchcraft Institute, Danae Tapia. So we are very much looking forward. You can check out our website, impact.nl, to read more and to reserve your tickets already. And if you feel like continuing tonight's discussions, a weird discussion, we hope to see you all in the rooftop Zoom bar on the last floor here at Planet Impact. We will have some after talk, keep chatting a little bit with each other, and the Zoom link will also follow in the chat here. So hope you see you all very soon again. Thank you.